Hello, everybody. This is Raja Shaleem from Lordshome, and we are so happy that you are watching us. And I welcome all of you. Today, in our podcast, we have a very special guest, Dr. Charles Madinger. He is my teacher and he's my trainer. He trained me about discipleship and orality. Today's topic is very interesting. This is something which has reshaped me, my journey in missions, and it has given me a perspective how I see discipleship. And it has enhanced and give me tools to do discipleship in a more effective way. So, Dr. Charles Madinger, I welcome you in today's podcast. Thank you so much for being with us. And I will start this today's podcast with your introduction. So first, please give us your introduction. Already we know you do not need any introduction, but for our
Yes,
viewers.
yes. Well, Shaleem, the only objection that I have to what you've said so far is about me being your teacher. I think first and foremost, we are friends, we are colleagues, we
Yes,
are in the work of the kingdom together, and we learn together
yes,
from one another and through one another. So I'm blessed to be called your friend and ministry partner.
yeah, sure.
So as I introduce myself, I can introduce myself as the husband of Mrs. Rosalind Anog Madinger. She's a Filipina. We live in Manila, Philippines. Uh, and there is much more to our story, but uh, just know that this marriage that we experience is literally a marriage made in heaven.
Wow.
There's a whole testimony that goes with that someday maybe we can share. But at this point, just know that God had a plan. My wife, Rose, had been committed in ministry, and it was not that she was not looking to be married, but she went 50 years and she thought maybe she would not be married. And then all of a sudden, uh, some things happened in my life as well.
Mhm.
I had been married before for 40 years, and my wife of 40 years died in a house fire that I had escaped out of the house, out of the second floor. And my first wife died in that fire. Uh, and after that, again, this is the very abbreviated version. God basically told me that the U.S. would no longer be my home. I heard his audible voice say, "This is no longer your home." And then he said, after I told him, I don't want to be married again. I just want to put my hand to the plow, do the work. Then God said, after he said, "This is not your home," he said, "And you are not to be alone. I have someone else for you." And I said, "Lord, I don't want to get married." I just knew, be quiet. The Lord had someone. And I said, "Okay, fine." I figured I would be going back to Africa, where I had worked for many, many years, uh, doing programs with the church and with governments on HIV/AIDS and pastor training, lots of different things like that. So, anyhow, I figured that I'd go back to Africa, but no, I had to come to the Philippines and speak at a conference. And then on my way here, again, I said, "Lord, I really don't want to go to the Philippines. Everybody there has heard of Jesus. I want to go where places where people have not heard of him." And the Philippines is 95% Christianized. And so I came to do the training because I knew I was supposed to. And when the plane landed, I was getting off the plane and I heard God's voice again. This time, as I'm stepping off the deck of the plane onto the jet bridge, I heard him say audibly these words, "Welcome home." And I knew I was home in the Philippines. Never wanted to come. I wanted to go where people don't. Well, God said, "This is going to be your home." Fast forward, I did our training. We had a training of 50 people from 22 different countries by invitation only. They learned about the same thing we're going to talk about tonight, orality, and how it applies to their ministry and how it will multiply the impact of our ministries if we do what God showed us to do. And so we're at this training. The final day, we have the closing session, and the worship leader has us singing, "How Great is Our God." And then we take the Lord's Supper together, still the song singing in the background. And then he said, now we're going to pray John 3:16 in your mother tongue, standing in a circle, one at a time. First person, Filipino. Second person, from Myanmar. Third person, Vietnam. Fourth person, Mongolia. Praying, God, you so loved Mongolians that you gave your one and only son, that whoever believes in him in Mongolia will never perish but have everlasting life. Then the next person, their language, their people. And God visited the room in the glory of his presence. Everyone, some of them fell to their knees, some were weeping, some were just standing in praise still. And as that happened, I heard the Lord's voice the third time in 3 months. And he said this, as the person who organized the conference walked from one side of the room to go talk to the worship leader, I heard God say, and this is the woman. That's my Rose. He selected her from the beginning of time. He prepared me with my first marriage to learn how to love this wife of my older age now. So God is at work in us, and he speaks. That's the whole point of this thing we call orality. How did God speak his mind and his heart to communicate with his children, his family? So
Wow.
that's my introduction. We work out of the Philippines here. We are now in, I can't remember how many it is, 25 countries, something like that,
Wow.
training and raising up new leaders for uh, teaching the way Jesus taught.
Well, this is so amazing. And but I want you to tell us how you get introduced with orality,
Mm.
how you began it. What was your journey?
My journey began as a young pastor. I was called back to the church where I grew up. After seminary, they wanted me to come back and help out for a short time. So I said yes. But the church was in a community that when I left 10 years previous to that, it was all, this was in the US, it was all white people, Anglos. When I came back 10 years later, there had been a massive economic and social transition in that community. And it was now 96% African American. Totally different kind of ministry in those two different cultures. And so I had to ask the question, how do we connect as white people to African Americans? That's a really hard thing to do. And there were no simple answers. So I went to study with people in California, where I ended up doing a doctor of ministry, asking them, what are the questions that I need to ask? Don't even give me the answers. Just tell me, what are the questions? So that's how I started down this trail of asking those questions. And it boils down to, in different cultures, we connect on the same issues, but in different ways. So I started learning. I found this educator. His name was William Parker. He's an African American educator talking about the difference between Anglos who came from Europe and how they migrated to the US, and Africans coming in a different way, most of them through slavery and bringing their culture with them. And he called that orality. The Europeans he called lettered cultures, much like Pakistan and other regions occupied by the British before, learned these letters and the lettered way of looking at things. So Parker opened my eyes and said, you're not going to connect with African Americans using your lettered approach. Simple things like how do they view time? In a Euro culture, we have these things like this. Maybe you can see it right here. What is this thing? Can you tell? That's a watch. Yeah. We measure time. And we know right now on my clock, it's 1934 and 42 seconds. That's how my clock above me is working.
Yes.
In an African culture, time is not measured that way. Time is what we are experiencing. What time is it right now? It's time for me to be with my friend Shaleem and talk with some of his friends. That's what time is. So I had to relearn how different people connect on these things we now call the traits of orality. With the book we have is called Connecting Points. How do we make our message stick? So I started learning those things. Long story short, after that, God called me into missions ministry in a large church in the U.S. And I started seeing all these people with amazing ministries, but oftentimes, like think of Pakistan. Oftentimes somebody would have a ministry and they want to go to a rural area where people really don't even, for the most part, read and write, and especially the women don't. And yet they were taking literature and things like, our PowerPoint programs. That's a very structured, literalistic way of looking at things. So I saw all those and said, something's wrong with this. It's not bad. It's just they'll never connect with those people using literature. So it took me down this trail. Eventually, God called me out of congregational ministry and into the rest of the world because there were some very big issues going on in the early part of this century. HIV/AIDS was rampant in Africa. And so we developed a strategy that's very similar to the way Jesus taught on how to address the crisis of the spread of HIV/AIDS and the care of people. Because if someone, even in South Asia, if someone was known to have contracted AIDS, what would happen? Well, the men of the community would come with clubs and they'd kill the person. You may have heard stories like that. That was a reality. So how do you prevent that from happening? How do you get rid of the myths around HIV/AIDS? So we started on that track. We were also asked to come and help in Afghanistan with the elections there in 2003, 2004, building a communication strategy that is rooted in the local culture, using local voices and the message that's not Western, but it's created right on the spot. So all of those things were happening, and we were learning how do you connect with oral cultures. And where we started using this strategy, whether it be HIV/AIDS, the civic education in Afghanistan, we did the comprehensive peace agreement in Sudan, other HIV/AIDS programs in sub-Saharan Africa. And when we looked at them and examined why did these work so much better than what everybody else was doing, and it wasn't because we said it. We were being funded by international organizations, and we had to have what they called third-party evaluators. These were major universities who said, okay, what are you going to try to do? And we told them our learning objectives. Then we did our program. Oftentimes it was a radio drama. It would have interviews with people. It would have music that was created for that message. Uh, we even had one that was a comedian making jokes about the issue because comedy is an art form that drives home a point. So we had all these different things that we would use in our programs. And when we did it, the results were 3 times better than anybody else.
Mhm.
And when I say anybody else, I'm talking about people like Harvard University,
Wow.
University of Maryland, Johns Hopkins University. And we had people who were uh, paid to critique what we were doing. Did this work or not? And they showed it worked overwhelmingly. We accomplished more than what we even said we would do. Uh, so, in all of that, we learned how do you connect with people, especially people who do not read to learn. That was an important statement. Now, this is back 20 years ago, and we've come a long way since then, but that was our starting point. And
Mhm.
then we started learning that everyone has this thing about us. It's called the image of God.
Okay.
God Himself is a communicator,
Yes.
Father, Son, and Spirit. Before anything existed, God the Father, Son, and Spirit communicated with one another, even what they wanted this universe to be and planet Earth. And even before they spoke, let there be light, they knew ahead of time that they wanted a creation. They wanted human beings that would choose to love the Godhead in the way God loves us. And to be able to choose that, we had to be able to rebel against Him. And they knew ahead of time that we would rebel against them so that they could enact their redemption plan and say, now we will take your death upon us, our son.
Mhm.
And all those who will have faith in him can have eternal life, not just this physical life that you were created with in the beginning. Now you can have an eternal life with us. All those who would believe the message. So, from before the beginning, God knew the end and what he would have to do. So, how did he communicate throughout redemptive history?
So,
Well, he started out, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to stop you here. And so when you are sharing your experiences with different nations, and
Mhm.
it seems orality strategies is not something it is not something we learn in universities and colleges. It is something we learn from the people who from the people who really needed to listen the message we had. So that is something, because this is about people, so the people only can tell us how they want to listen or how they would listen. So
Yes.
I want you to elaborate. This like when we talk about orality strategies, uh, how is it something we have crafted, or is it something we have adopted?
Yes, to both. Now, let me back up again.
Okay.
Uh, to truly understand orality and this
Uh-huh.
image of God, God made us like Him to express our mind and our heart through all 5 senses. That's basically what orality is. God made us to be able to express our mind and our heart through all 5 senses through sight, we see things, through sound,
Mm-hmm.
through smell,
Mm-hmm.
through taste,
Mm-hmm.
and through touch.
Yes.
And God used all of those to communicate his mind.
Mm-hmm.
He did it in creation. Let there be light. He did it with Abraham. Look up in the stars of the sky and the sand of the seashore, using those illustrations. He used it in the tabernacle that Moses was commanded to build, because in the garden, we lost the
Yes.
presence of God.
Yeah.
And God said to Moses, I want you to build a space where I can meet again with my people. My presence will dwell there, but there are certain conditions. Only those can enter who are dressed, who are washed. There has to be a sacrifice. There has to be this lampstand visual. There has to be the incense going up. There has to be the showbread and the oil and the wine that the priests are to consume. There has to be the killing of the animal. There has to be the sound of the trumpets. You see the pillar of fire at night and the smoke by day. God used all five senses so that he could communicate with us, so we could receive his message and
Yes.
truly get what he's saying. That's what orality is about. How God expressed his mind and his heart so we would receive it. And you know this hand gesture already, Shaleem, so that we would process the information that he gives us to understand it.
Mhm.
And mostly he did that through stories. The Bible is 75% stories, stories and songs, 80 to 85% stories and songs. Why did God do that? I thought the Bible was a text. No, the Bible is not a text. The Bible was first God speaking his mind and his heart to prophets who spoke that to other people. They had others who wrote it down on scrolls so it could be stored and it could be picked up again later on and read to others who needed to hear the message. So orality is as much about print text as it is just hearing, because God's mind and his heart, yes, it was spoken first, but text, writing, is just another way of expressing our mind and our heart.
Yes.
Now, you lose something when you put it into text, like I did just now. If you see the transcript of this recording, it will say something like, uh, and text is just as much part of orality as anything else. Okay. Those are just words.
Yeah.
That's just text. But
Yeah.
that's not what I communicated. I said, orality is much more
Yes.
than text,
Yeah. So
right?
so that was just my question was actually when I asked you about. So we will discuss more about what orality is. We will take
Right.
a short break. Come back. Uh, s- so Dr. Chuck, I will now want you to talk about how do you define orality? And because orality is getting popular, you know, and people
Yep.
who are in leadership, who are in missions, whatever their calling is, they are serving the Lord and they are getting to know orality strategies. But the
Right.
word orality is something creating confusion. You know how it goes.
Yes, it does.
So, so I want you to please go ahead and uh, tell us how do you see orality? How do you define it? How a person who is curious to learn what is orality, what his understanding and how his understanding should develop regarding orality. Welcome.
Okay, that's a very good trying to answer.
Okay.
It becomes a little bit confusing because the term itself, uh, that was coined many years many years ago by someone who was uh, specializing in literature. And he saw the difference between those cultures who had a value for reading and writing, orthography, the letters, and how you make words up. Those cultures that didn't have that, he called orality,
Mhm.
primary orality. And then people start learning more and more and more about how to read and write and the value of it. And he said it moved on to what he called secondary orality. Now, the reason
Mhm.
I like those long term uh, definitions is because there's something there that we all know is pretty much just obvious. People who read and learn how to read, even your brain is wired together differently after you learn how to do that. It doesn't make you better.
Yeah,
It
that's
just makes it more able to work with concepts and principles and think in terms of organizationally outlining things the way print text does.
mhm.
Others have a high degree of ability to take that which is oral and
Mhm.
make sense out of it.
Mhm.
They much better interpret conversations and things like that than people who learn how to read and write, as is obvious with today's youth cultures that cannot hardly put two sentences together because it's not 58 characters on uh, an app, right? So there's lots of variation there. So what is this thing anyway? Uh, in the beginning, uh, let me just say this: orality is becoming a field of study, a recognized field of study around the world. We won't go into the depths of that, but for that to happen, there has to be a layers of definitions. The first one is this general historic definition, which is orality is just a preference for oral communication. Just a preference. And that is the classic textbook definition. And it came in very handy for biblical scholars, even. How do we get our Bible? We got our Bible orally. It was passed down from household to household. The stories about Jesus were told and retold and retold, and they got written down. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Others were writing it down as well. Luke found several sources that he went to give us his account of the life of Jesus. So, orality in that sense knows that God communicated his word in many times and in many ways, and it all started orally or visually. So, that beginning point is important, especially in biblical studies. But we got to go beyond that. So, a uh, it's called a conceptual definition. What's the concept of orality? And that's what I said before is how we express orality is a learned framework of how to express our mind and our heart through all five senses. Right now, even Shaleem, you're communicating with me. You did not say a word, but you communicated, and I'm going to communicate with you that we feel very relaxed together. I didn't speak a word, neither did you. And yet it communicated something, right? So, this thing of morality is how we express, and it's a framework we learn very early in life. For those who, what we call, live in a high orality reliant context, we start out learning uh, through songs and dance, and uh, we listen to our father tell stories or proverbs that emerge, or the folk tales that we learn as children. That's a very high orality reliant framework. Others start teaching their children very early in life an alphabet It might be Pashto, it might be Urdu, it might be the Romanized letters, it might be Chinese characters, but there are those symbols that we use that make up words. So other children move away from this high oral existence and start learning more and more of this thing we call textuality,
Mhm.
and how we begin moving into more areas. It doesn't make us better, it just makes us able to communicate in different ways. No more than these are different kinds of literacies, how to read and write. Another kind of literacy that I love in Pakistan is when people play the harmonium.
Yes.
Oh, wow. And I'm
That's
not sure, Shaleem, if it's possible to play the harmonium without people dancing and singing at the same time.
not possible.
They all go together, right? So that is a literacy. You know what to do and when to do it because your brain now has been configuring that way to learn. So the conceptual definition says
Mhm.
we need that framework.
Mhm.
Everybody needs a framework out of which to work. So some develop very early in life this high orality reliant framework. Their memories are amazing. They don't have to write anything down. You tell them to something 3 times and they've
Yeah.
got it. It's
Yes.
like in Pakistan, you know the Psalms, the book of Psalms. You know it because you've recited it over and over. You have an amazing oral memory and it's collective. You help each other out, right? So
Even
that's a
if
part of the,
I'm sorry to cut you,
yeah.
even in my culture, we have all
Ah,
150 psalms we sing in our heart language, and we have learned
exactly.
yeah.
That's because you live in
Yes,
a high orality reliant
yes,
culture.
yes.
Now,
That's
you
right.
and your family moved down into what we call lower orality reliance. You learned how to read, you learned how to write, you know how to use a computer. You go to conferences, you know how to put together a PowerPoint presentation. All those things that are low orality reliant. And again, it doesn't make you better. And not everybody understands you when you use that. In fact, we see that when we come down into this area of low orality reliance, we only connect with 20% of the world.
Yes,
The other 80% don't get what you're doing.
yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
so we have the historic definition of just a reliance on oral communication. We have this conceptual definition that says it's a learned framework of how we express our mind and our heart using all 5 senses. And then we move on because to have any kind of definition, if we're in the academic world anyway, it's called an operational definition.
Mhm.
How do you apply this and it works the same across the board? How do
Mhm.
you define that? So the the definition that we are using for orality as a an operational definition is that we connect in the 15 traits of orality
Mhm.
that range from very high to very low reliance. For
Mhm.
instance, as we said before, time is one of those traits. How we express ourselves, uh, the way we use, uh, let's say, narrative, how
Mhm.
we tell a story.
Yes.
For some people, telling a story is just uh, an illustration in a sermon. For others, like Jesus, by the way, the story is the point. When Jesus confronted the Pharisees and Sadducees the last week of his life and told them that parable about the king who went off to a certain country and he left the property to these managers, and when it came time to collect his profits, he sent his servants and they beat them up and sent them back. And then they finally even killed the king's son. And then he asked the Pharisees, "What should we do to that group of managers?" And they said they ought to kill him. They've sinned. And then they realized Jesus was talking about them. The story was the point. He didn't have to explain it. That's a high orality reliant use of story. For us, we use a story simply to illustrate something. So there are 15 traits, there are 15 things we need to look at to operationalize that framework, to say it works the same across the board. It doesn't matter if it's in Pakistan or if it's in the Philippines, both P countries. Same principles are at work. So we have the historic definition, we have the conceptual definition, we have an operational definition, and then what I like to call the missiological definition.
Yes.
In other words, how do we put this to use in the kingdom of God? And Jesus modeled that for us. You may recall, I talked about all those different projects across Africa and Central Asia and other places. When we studied what made all of those so much more successful, we found 7 things that came together.
Okay.
Jesus used those same 7 things. We call them descriptive disciplines, but Jesus used the same 7.
So here, I want you to help us understand because you have come to that point. So I just want to extend it. Explain us how orality has been helping us in the process of discipleship and how it is doing today. Because discipleship is something very important. Discipleship is our core value. That's what Jesus taught us to do. And our focus is discipleship. Orality is a tool to do more effective discipleship. So that's what I want to listen.
Let me alter your statement just a little bit.
Okay, please.
Say orality is more than a tool. It's what makes the tools work.
Yes.
You use any tool, and if you take the principles that Jesus used and apply it to the tool you're using, for instance, many people still use the 4 spiritual laws to share the good news, right?
Yes.
Even in Pakistan.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. That's a tool. However, in Indonesia, they took those same 4 spiritual laws and contextualized them, turning them into stories. Okay, so the tool was the 4 spiritual laws. Orality is what helped them modify that to connect. Remember that word, connect?
Yes.
Connect with the people. So if we look at anything we're doing, we go back to what Jesus himself was doing. And let me give you an example. Somebody will go with somebody you know, Dr. Neil Benavidez.
Yes.
He works on one of the islands here in the Philippines.
Yes.
He graduated from 2 of the best theological schools in the Philippines. And then he went to the Oxford Center for Mission Study and did a PhD.
Yes.
I met him in his final session at Oxford. And we were hosting a
just to let our viewers know that Dr. Neil and I both were classmates.
Yes. Yes. So Neil had learned all sorts of things about how to teach, and he wanted to put up a seminary on the island of Mindoro.
Yes.
Now, the problem was there were 60 candidates who wanted to get into a seminary, but
Oh.
only three had ever gone to even high school. They hadn't graduated necessarily. Only three out of 60
Uh-huh.
had that kind of formal education. So, how do you train those people? And he knew he had a problem because every seminary, Bible school, uses a very structured approach to reading and writing and doing papers and outlines and a syllabus and uh, taking a test at the end that's in writing and all those things. And he said, that's not going to work here. What are we going to do? And it just so happened my wife and I came to the Oxford Center for Mission Studies to lead a conference.
Mm-hmm.
And while he had not registered for the conference, he came to it anyway and started hearing these things. And he said, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I need. So
Mm-hmm.
he came back to the Philippines and he said, we have to train people this way. Now, I didn't get into those 7 disciplines that we talk about of orality, of how Jesus used it, but you'll see how some of it come to play. And it's fruitfulness. So Neil came back. He had his 60 candidates, 30 of them he accepted into the program and started doing his teaching. Well, he had all of his new students do a survey of their churches. This is what they had to do. They had to preach 3 weeks, a
Mm-hmm.
sermon for a different sermon for 3 weeks in a row. Then on the fourth week, he would ask the people, what were the sermons that I preached? Starting with the last one that I preached. Could they remember the sermon? Did they know the story? Could they tell the story? Because it was all story based.
Mm-hmm.
Had they shared that story with someone and had they applied it to their life? Now, before they did their training,
Mm-hmm.
no one could remember even the last sermon they heard. Probably the same in most of our churches.
That is very normal.
They might be able to, and then he took them through a year of training. He
Mm-hmm.
taught them how to do what we call Bible dialogue, where
Mm-hmm.
you engage people in the story. They become a part of the story. And they themselves start discovering things about the characters. And they ask questions like, what is God trying to show me from this story and in this story? And yeah, so he did that for several months. And then he took the survey again.
Mm-hmm.
The pastors had to go preach another 3 sermons, ask the same 3 questions. What
Mm-hmm.
was last week's sermon?
Ah.
Now everyone could remember what the sermon was.
Wow.
Question number 2,
Mm-hmm.
can you tell the story?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone could tell the story. Think of Jesus calming the storm.
Mm-hmm.
I could tell that story right now.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone that heard that sermon could tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
Question number 3, have you applied the story? Because there are 2 big questions in that Jesus calms the storm story. One, why are you so afraid? And the
Mm-hmm.
second question is, where is your faith? So when they asked them what was the application, they could tell them what
Mm-hmm.
they what their fears were. Why are you so afraid? And what God was calling them to do in faith. And in fact, they could tell who they had shared that story with. They'd actually shared it with somebody else after church. And they could do it for all 3 weeks.
Wow.
Now, that is orality in practice. Neil took all of the things that we're talking about and put them into practice.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't have time to go into all those 7 things tonight. That's what our training is all about.
Yeah.
How do we teach and preach like Jesus did
Mm-hmm.
and like Neil learned to do and teach his students how to do it?
Yes.
Now, in that school, they have a requirement. If you come and you get into the program, within 2 years, you have to start a new church
Wow.
from scratch.
From scratch. Yes.
One of the students in 2 years started 14 new churches.
Oh my. Wow.
How did he do that? He used the same principles and methods we're talking about. It's not a program, it's not a tool. It's using the same things that Jesus did, that he learned from his Father.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at John 12, verse 48 and 49, Jesus says to the Pharisees who don't believe his message, he said, My Father, my message is from my Father, by the way, for he commanded me what to say
And how to say
and how to say it.
it.
Now, we do really good at the what to say. What orality is about
How to say it.
is how are you saying it that connects with the people in ways that your formal education will never do with them.
Mm-hmm.
Never. Now, you may connect with, if you have a congregation of 100 people, there may be 15 or 20
Mm-hmm.
that if you're preaching 3-point sermons and talking about principles and concepts and this, they're going to get it, but they probably are not going to apply it.
Yes.
And they're definitely not going to remember it.
Yes. I tell you one thing, which I have liked about orality the most is orality gives you a tool where you know how to relate biblical culture with modern day culture. And that is where something I have observed and experienced a real affection where people feel and know themselves really connected with the story and with the storyteller. When they see something happened 2000 years back and that story is still true with their current situation, and they see themselves within the story as a character of the story. So,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
that is something which has helped me in the ministry a lot. And that
Yes.
is the part about orality I love the most.
Yes. I need to be retooled
Yes.
because all of my formal education tooled me in ways that only well educated people can get.
Yes.
If I teach the way I was taught, only 10% of the people that I'm trying to reach will get what I'm really saying.
Mhm.
That's kind of scary.
Yes.
So, we just finished a training in Ethiopia with 20 schools and seminaries that want to learn how to teach this way.
Mhm.
And one of the uh, most important moments in that training came when we were talking about how in an oral culture, or what we call high orality reliance,
Mhm.
that we need to put things into the concrete, uh, meaning uh, when Jesus said the Son of Man is going to suffer and be persecuted by the leaders of the Jews, that was a concept,
Mhm.
and he did that on purpose.
Mhm.
They were not getting that message, and he didn't want them to yet. They live in a culture that needed the concrete. So later on, almost near the end of his ministry, he said it in these words. He said, the Son of Man is going to be delivered up to the priests, to the
Mhm.
leaders of the Jews, and they are going to crucify him
Mhm.
and kill him.
Mhm.
But on the third day, he will rise again. That
Mhm.
is putting it into the concrete. It's not just that they're going to persecute, that they're going to oppose me,
Mhm.
which they were. So putting it into the context. Now, when we explained that to these leaders, we asked them this question. We had them look at uh, uh, who their people are,
Mhm.
and form four different lines. One line would be very high orality reliant. They really have to have it in the concrete. Next to them comes a line of people who, yeah, they need it in the concrete, but they can get some principles and concepts. The next line is they love principles and concepts, but they also kind of like they can explain things with the concrete. And then the last one is it's all principles and concepts, philosophies, those kinds of things all the way over here. And then we ask them the question, where are you as a teacher when it comes to this one little part of orality? Where do you like to be? And every one of them came all the way over to the principles and concepts. And so that's what we learned to do when we went and got our doctoral degrees. Then we said, where are your students and their preferences? Well, their students were back this way and they understood principles and concepts, but they still like the concrete stories.
Yes.
Okay. Now, where are the people your students are teaching?
Mhm.
Well, of course, that's way over here.
Mhm.
They needed everything in the concrete. They needed stories about real things like Jesus did. The sower going out to sow his seed,
Mhm.
the pearl of great price, all of those things Jesus put into the concrete to help people understand. That's where the people are. And
Yes.
we said, okay, now, if you're teaching your students principles and concepts, and they teach just like you do, how will their churches be transformed?
Yes. Yeah.
They won't. And therein lies all of our problem. It's not just for Bible school and seminary professors,
Mhm.
it's for teachers, it's for pastors, it's for all of us who have learned to think and process way over here when most of the people live way over here.
Yes.
So it's up to us to learn how to do that. That's why iOS offers the certification that Shaleem is a part of, why we now have a master's program and even uh, advanced degrees in orality studies. It's happening in the Philippines. We have now, Shaleem, we have two more schools that are coming online in the Philippines. We
Wow.
have 20 schools, 18 schools, I'm sorry, in East Africa, another 18 in West Africa, and another 10 in French speaking schools, and another 10 in Portuguese speaking schools.
Wow.
So there's going to be like
You
60 schools
you have one
that
school
now.
in Pakistan. Don't forget that.
That's right. That's right. We got to formalize that.
Yes.
And then we got people in Brazil doing it. We
Yes.
have 7 countries in um, Central America,
Yes.
and even 2 schools in the US that are now starting to say, oh, we better pay attention to this. It makes all the difference on how people connect with Jesus.
Mhm.
Jesus went around preaching and teaching the kingdom of God and how to connect with God the Father through all of his stories, through
Mhm.
his parables, through his
Mhm.
object lessons,
Mhm.
connecting, connecting, connecting.
Yes. Yes.
That's what it's about.
So, it is since I'm a student of orality strategies, so for me, it is always a good and pleasant experience to talk more about orality and how it works. I think we have gone more than an hour, 1 hour and a half. So
Yeah. Yeah. You've got some ethics.
yes. So maybe we may need to have another podcast to talk more about how orality is reshaping today's mission world. For now, I hope we could help our viewers understand what orality is and how it is impacting evangelism and discipleship all over the world. So, thank you so much,
Amen.
Dr. Chuck. Thank you so much for today's podcast, for being with us. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And since you are my family, and I'm more than happy to talk to you. And so, viewers, thank you so much for being with us. We will meet you again in another podcast. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Okay. And all of your listeners as well.
Thank you so much.